What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Good With Project. I'm your host, Jerry Scarlato, and today I want to talk to you about trading what feels good for what is necessary. This is such an important conversation because today's society revolves so much around doing what feels good and not what is necessary to accomplish the things that we say, we wish, we hope, we want to accomplish. We have goals, dreams, aspirations. So many of us do, although they seem to be getting fewer and less over the years, which is super saddening because so many people could accomplish so many things if they just didn't listen to what society had to say. But nonetheless, we have fallen into this way of life that we strive more for what feels good than for what is necessary to get things done, what's necessary to move things forward. This is a lie that has been told to society over and over again. It has been propagated in many different ways from, big corporations that sell us things like sugary foods and alcoholic beverages and shots and medications and other things that basically either are literally the thing that is making us feel good or is covering up the thing that is making us feel good. For instance, all the sugary nonsense, all the processed nonsense, all the alcoholic nonsense, all that stuff is stuff that makes us feel good. Sugary foods make us feel good. Salty foods make us feel good. Fatty foods make us feel good. All of those things and a combination of those make us feel good. When you put the perfect combination, it creates this thing called the bliss point. That's what the big food industry calls it, because it is the point at which your bliss is reached. If you go beyond that point, then you don't like it. If you go below that point, then it is not as addicting to you. You don't crave it as much. It doesn't make you feel as good. So there is a bliss point that they shoot for. And all the processed foods that we have are created to seek out that bliss point. And then there are medications created to cover those things up. So if you eat enough processed food over time, your body will start to develop insulin resistance. When you get to a certain point of insulin resistance, you then have type 2 diabetes. Then you can just pump yourself with insulin or take other medications that will cover up that type 2 diabetes so that you continue to feel good by eating the things that you want to eat. And now you can be given medications so you can just cover those things up. That is just one example of how we have made decisions in society to move down a path of what feels good instead of what is necessary to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. When it comes to things in business, for instance, ideas that make us feel good are things that sound good in theory, but are not very useful in practice. Some of those things are, for instance, if you get into business because you think that big corporations are ripping us off and they're the reasons that are making us feel broke. So you're going to start a business that gives lower prices and you're just going to not necessarily give things away, but you're going to sell things closer to wholesale so that you're going to build this virtuous company that gives things away at a lower price to help people more, whatever. That idea is the worst idea in the world because the race to the bottom is very quick and is only won by generally the biggest competitor. The biggest competitors today are like Amazon, again, big food companies and the like that they develop and produce and manufacture in such big, huge, gigantic quantities and sell in such gigantic quantities that they can sell with small margins. Margins are just the difference between what you pay, what the company pays for the product, and what it sells for. That's your margin. So a company that sells a lot of a thing, a whole shit ton of a thing, can sell with smaller margins if they choose to, because they're selling a lot of it. Whereas a company that does not sell as many of the same exact thing potentially, cannot sell with small margins because they need to make money. And what you recognize in a business, if you go in and you try to create this virtuous business in which you're going to overcome these big food companies and these other big organizations that you believe are ripping us off and causing all of this, wreaking all of this havoc in the economy and in society, you're going to find that you're going to go out of business very quickly, because even though it feels good to try and race to the bottom, it's an unwinnable strategy. It can't be done. It's not that it can't be done. Obviously, it is being done by somebody, but it's not going to be done by you. It's just not going to happen. So that's just a strategy, not a strategy, but that's just another idea in business on how we talk about things, think about things, do things potentially based on how they feel versus reality, versus what reality actually tells us can be done. Another way we do what feels good instead of what's necessary is by filling our day up with a bunch of tasks, just a bunch of checklist kind of tasks. We put our list together, we check them off one at a time, and as we check them off, we feel good. And at the end of the day, we have all of our things checked off the list. We feel good because we have all of our things checked off the list. But we never stop to ask the questions, are these the things I should be doing? We never stop to ask the question, is there something else I could be doing that would make all of these things easier or potentially eliminate them all? We just do the things because they are doable things, or because they are easier to do than the hard things, than the things that we know we should be doing, but that we're avoiding because they're more challenging, because they require a different level of thinking, because they require a little bit of problem solving, because it requires you having a hard conversation, because it requires you stepping out of your comfort zone in some way, shape, or form. So we avoid those things at all costs while we continue to do things over here. We're just kind of like churning in circles, but it still feels good because we can look at our list at the end of the day and say, we got all of our stuff done. I checked everything off the list. Therefore, I must have been productive. But there is a clash in the definition of productivity, if you will. There's a one way that people think about it that it's not the wrong way to think about it, but it is an unproductive way to think about productivity. And then there is the productive way to think about productivity. The unproductive way is what we're talking about, having a bunch of things to do and then just checking them off the list because it feels good to check them off the list. All of these things that are doable, that potentially do something, but don't necessarily do and move something forward, that feels like productivity, but it is unproductive productivity. Productivity is the expansion of an idea or the expansion of something. It is the growth of something. So productive productivity is you do something and it expands what you're doing. It grows what you're doing. It moves it forward. If you're doing a project, if you're trying to put a presentation together and you do some research and then you do some more research and then you do some more research and then you do some more research, and after you did your first bout of research, you already had all the answers, but then you did 4 other bouts of research after that, you're not expanding anymore. You're not growing. You're not moving toward the completion of that task. All you're doing is more research to feel good because you don't want to actually sit down and put the damn thing together. You don't want to have to put the notes together, sit down in front of your computer and put your PowerPoint together. That part feels heavy to you, so you just sit there and do more research. Not expanding, not growing, not moving toward a completion of something. You're just doing more of the same thing over and over again, which is called insanity, by the way. So we don't want to fall into that trap. We want to be able to get things done. We want to be able to move things forward. We want to be able to accomplish things in life. So you don't feel like, you don't get to a point where you feel like you're just a hamster in a wheel, which is where a lot of those people eventually get to. Those checkbox kind of people, eventually they get to that point where it's like, man, I feel like I'm doing a lot of stuff, but I'm just not moving forward. I'm a hamster in a wheel. I'm just going in circles and circles and circles, doing things and doing more things and then doing some more things, but nothing's happening. It's just like this constant churn of tasks and churn of things to do. So we need to be able to separate those feel-good tasks from the necessary task, implement more necessary tasks, eliminate or reduce the feel-good tasks so that we can get things done. Because what you don't want to do is fall into the belief that you just can't accomplish something in life because you're just doing the wrong things. Because you're doing these things that, again, they're doable. They're something you can do, but they're not necessarily usable, or they're not moving anything. You feel like you're not making progress because you're not making progress. You're doing things, but you're not moving anywhere. You want to be able to move somewhere. Human beings are biologically built for progress. And that's why this idea is so important. When you fall into the belief that what you're doing isn't working and therefore you should maybe just stop doing it, especially if you're trying to build something, if you're trying to build a business, if you're trying to change your health, if you're trying to accomplish something, some sort of goal or dream that you're going after, you can't get to the point where you convince yourself that you can't do it simply because you're doing the wrong things. If it feels like you're churning and you just keep going, but you're not getting anything done, it's because you're doing the wrong thing. Or that thing was working and now it has become the wrong thing. Maybe it was the right thing at some point, but eventually it became the wrong thing. Eventually you have to start doing something different. This is a normal thing in fitness, for instance. How many people start their exercise journey? They go to the gym, they're in there for 4 weeks and they see some progress because they haven't done shit before that. So if you go from not doing anything to doing something, you're going to see some progress. Your fitness level will start to go up. Your body will slightly start to change. It's not going to be a drastic change in 4 weeks, but it'll start to change a little bit. Your energy level will start to shift and so on. The problem is people do the same thing. You go in, you do the same thing. Eventually you have to change that. If you just go in and you're doing the same thing, you're not doing anything anymore. It's not to say that you're not going to stay healthier than you were. You will definitely stay healthier. It's definitely better than what you were. But since human beings are biologically built for progress, for moving forward, we get antsy. We're 4 weeks in, we're 6 weeks in, we haven't seen progress, we haven't seen something move forward, but we also haven't changed anything. We haven't changed our intensity. We haven't changed the type of exercise that we're doing. We haven't changed the weight that we're using. We haven't changed anything. And since we haven't changed anything, we're not moving forward. It's the same idea in business as well. We get in, we do something that gets us some level of progress for a short period of time, but then we keep doing that same thing too long. And the progress stops, slows down at first, and then stops eventually. And that's what you don't want. You want to be able to continue to move forward. Of course you do. If you understand that human beings are biologically built for progress and that eventually the thing that you're doing needs to become something different so that you can move forward again, then you can continue that progress. You can continue moving forward instead of getting frustrated with what you're doing, instead of continuing to do a bunch of tasks that are potentially completely unnecessary that you could just eliminate altogether and start doing something that has more impact and potentially takes up less time. Seems like a crazy idea for sure, but you can do something that takes less time and has more impact than the stuff that you're currently doing. Because the stuff right now is just the stuff. It's just what you're doing. But you could be doing more, something better, but less of it. Let's go back to exercise as an example. So in exercising, what most people do when they go to the gym at first, let's say it's New Year's resolution is I want to go in, I want to lose some weight. You know, how many people do that every year and then stop every year? So they go to the gym and what do? Well, they look around and they look lost. And then they're like, well, let me start on the treadmill. So they go to the treadmill or the elliptical or the bike or whatever, and they start pedaling or walking or whatever. And they just do that for a while. After 15 or 20 minutes, they're like, okay, well, I'm going to go try some of these machines. So they step off the treadmill, they go walk over to the machines, they look at the description, they read the directions, they sit down, they try the machine. They're like, okay, yeah, that one's fine. And then they go to another one, they try that one, and then they maybe try a third one. And because those are the 3 machines that they've tried, those are the 3 machines they stick to because they now know how to use those machines and they don't look stupid using those machines. So the next time they go in the gym, they go to the treadmill, do the thing, go to those 3 machines, and then maybe go back to the treadmill. And that's what people continue to do. It sounds crazy, but that is a normal routine for people going into the gym. So let's say you spent an hour doing that. The average person, what was the statistic? The average person is in the gym for like 60 to 75 minutes, and they actually work out at some level of intensity for like 7 to 10 minutes. Think about that for a second. At any rate, so let's say that's what you've done. You've been in the gym for 60 minutes and you've done that routine. Treadmill, a couple of machines, back to treadmill. And that's all you've done. So with that, you're going to get some roundabout number, 200, maybe 250 calories worth of activity calorie burn. Or here's another option, which would be less time, but more impactful. You go to a group class in which there's an instructor and they're teaching you how to do things. And during that group class, which is maybe only 30 minutes long, and it's a kettlebell high intensity type of class, you go, and for that 30 minutes, you're doing work 15 out of the 30 minutes. You have built-in rest in between rounds, but for that 15 minutes, you're working hard. You're doing something intense. And therefore, in a matter of 30 minutes, maybe you burn the same 200 to 250 calories, but you've done it in 30 minutes instead of 60 minutes. And you've gotten a lot more done in that 30 minutes than you did in that 60 minutes. Okay? Do you understand the concept? Just because something can take up a lot of time and things can be done, it doesn't mean they have to be done and it has to take up that much time. So how do we start to narrow this down? Well, I've talked about many different ideas on how to do this. I want to introduce a new one today that I grabbed out of this book, The One Thing by Gary Keller. But I've talked about, for instance, the Eisenhower matrix, which helps us understand and categorize the tasks that we're doing. The Eisenhower matrix helps us categorize things into four categories, things that we need to do, things that we need to decide when to do, things that we need to delegate to somebody else, and things we need to delete. That's one thing that you can think about. You can go back and find, I'm pretty sure that I've done an episode strictly on the Eisenhower matrix. So if you go search for that, you should be able to find that somewhere. If you don't find it, let me know, and I'll be happy to do an episode on the Eisenhower matrix because it is one of the most impactful ideas that you can have in order to do things that are necessary and things that move the needle forward. But this idea that I want to introduce today, it's just a question, actually, which I love the question so much, which is why I wanted to talk about it today. So in the book, The One Thing, as you can imagine, it is about helping you understand the one thing that you need to do at any given moment, which, of course, requires you to know the one thing that you want to accomplish down the road. So we're not going to get into that, but I do want to get into what he calls the focusing question. The focusing question that helps us understand what we can do now to move the needle forward. What is the most important thing we can do right now to move the needle forward? So the focusing question is, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else gets easier or unnecessary? What's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else gets easier or unnecessary? This is such a powerful question and such a powerful frame to help you understand that not all things are created equal, not all actions are created equal, and just because something can be done doesn't mean that it needs to be done, should be done, either by you or by somebody else for that matter. Potentially, it should just be eliminated altogether, which is a crazy idea because we hate to think that we've wasted so much time continuously doing a task when we shouldn't have been doing the task or didn't need to be doing a task all along. But he does a great job of breaking that question down. He puts it into 3 parts, if you will. Part 1 is what's the one thing I can do? Part 2 is such that by doing it. And then part 3 is everything else will be easier or unnecessary. And then he goes through and explains those 3 parts, breaks them apart, and then tells us what they mean. So I'm going to read through these because this is such an important idea. Remember, I'm going to repeat this probably 10 more times between now and the end of this episode, and I probably only have about 10 more minutes of the episode left. Not all things need to be done. Just because it can be done doesn't mean it should be done. Just because you have been doing it doesn't mean you need to continue to do it. What's up, guys? I want to jump in here real quick and talk to you about achieving your goals. If you're listening to this podcast, then I know you want to achieve something extraordinary in life, whether that's building a business, getting in the best shape possible, or maximizing your time with your family. And if you want to do any of those things, there's 2 things you need to be able to master. One of them is time, and the other one is productivity. It starts with managing your time and being able to eliminate the things that are getting in your way so that then you can set your goals and start to break them down into actionable steps and take those steps and interject them into your life so that you can take action and turn those dreams into reality. And in order to help you do that, I created the Alpha Life Action Plan. It's literally a 90-day action plan that does both of those things. Starts with taking your time, figuring out where you're spending it, eliminating the things or delegating the things that you don't need to do so that you can free up your time to then set your goals and break them down into action steps and start to take action on them so that you can achieve the things that you want in life. The Alpha Life Action Plan is yours for free. All you have to do is cover shipping. You can go to goodwolfproject.us/action plan and put in your information there and have it sent to you ASAP. That's goodwolfproject.us/action plan so you can start to take action on those goals and dreams you want to create the life that you deserve. First, part 1, what's the one thing I can do? In the book, he says, this sparks focused action. What's the one thing? Tells you the answer will be one thing versus many. It forces you towards something specific. It tells you right up front that although you may consider many options, you need to take this seriously because you don't get 2, 3, 4, or more. You can't hedge your bet. You're allowed to pick one thing and one thing only. Most people have a problem with this because human beings like options. We like staying open. We like to be open to ideas. Being open to ideas is a good thing, but we like being open to options. We hate feeling stuck in one thing. All human beings do this. Women would say men have a hard time dedicating themselves to one person, but women do this as well. Women hate feeling stuck in one thing. That's why so many women try so many diets or so many exercise programs. Men, especially men in business, have a hard time dedicating themselves to one marketing strategy or one product or one service. So we hate the idea of keeping ourselves and not having our options open. We hate that idea. But because we keep our options open, we don't allow ourselves to focus on one thing that potentially, if we just recognize that if we chose any of the options available and chose one and focused on it, there's a good chance that we're going to get to where we're trying to go. Because probably if you've done enough looking and researching and thinking about it, and you've narrowed it down to a number of options, any of the options will work. But it's because you're allowing yourself to stay open and not just be and focus on the one thing in front of you. It's because all of the other things are still available in your mind and still available as potential avenues that the one thing you've chosen is not working. So the idea of what's the one thing you can do means what's the specific one thing you're going to do. The one thing, not a couple of things, not a backup thing or 2 or 3. What's the one thing I'm going to do? Okay, part 2, such that by doing it, by completing it. Okay? He says, this tells you there's a criterion your answer must meet. It's the bridge between just doing something and doing something for a specific purpose. Such that by doing it, lets you know you're going to have to dig deep, because when you do this one thing, something else is going to happen. Okay? The point is, when you complete this task, when you complete this action, it's going to move you to the next action. It's going to move you forward to another thing that you're going to have to do. This is why so many people would rather just check things off a list over and over again, which are typically all the same thing. And it's not to say that there aren't repetitive tasks that could or should be done. Of course there are. So for instance, I put out a daily email called the Daily 1%, which, by the way, if you're not signed up for the Daily 1%, go to goodwolfproject.us/daily, get yourself signed up so that you can have daily growth and get yourself better every day and focus on one thing a day to get yourself better. Nonetheless, where was I? Oh, I send the email out every day. Okay, so it's a task that I do every day. But my hedge is that I believe that one task, by doing that one thing, that same thing every day, because it's just an email, it's a different content every day. Every day is a different content. It's a different idea with a different action for you to take. But by doing that, I believe that action over time is going to lead to many good quality results. That's what I believe. If over time, and every 3 months I check this, if over time it's not moving toward the thing that I believe it's going to do, when that stops happening, I'll stop doing it. Or I'll change how I'm doing it, or I'll adjust it, or whatever. Okay, so that's an example of a daily thing that I do repetitively that I believe is moving me in progressing ideas forward, progressing things forward. However, most things aren't like that. Most things are things that you do once, and then you move to the next thing, and then you do that, which then moves you to the next thing, and then you do that. If we go back to our developing a presentation idea, you do research, and then you look at your notes and you make sense out of them, and then you put an outline together, and then you put a presentation together, and then you refine the presentation, and then you finalize the presentation, and then you do the presentation. Okay, so you've done all of those steps just one time, maybe a couple of times if you're, reviewing the outline and revising the outline a couple of times. But nonetheless, you've done them. You're not just repetitively doing them over and over and over again. Okay, and that's why so many people struggle, because it takes thinking to do things, to think about something different to do. You can go in and just do the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again, because it doesn't require any thinking. It doesn't require you to have to come up with a new idea. It doesn't require you to problem solve. It doesn't require you to think about next steps. You just go in and you do the same thing. But you should be doing something so that you are then moving to another thing. Okay, part 3 of the question, everything else will be easier or unnecessary. Easier or unnecessary. And that part is so important because we don't like to think that things are unnecessary, because we like to feel productive. And by doing something, we feel productive. But remember, there's an unproductive productive, and there is a productive productive. Unproductive productive is just checking things off the list, but we're not actually moving forward. Productive is what we want. And that may mean not having to do as many things as you're doing, which you should be grateful for. Okay, so he says, Archimedes said, give me a lever long enough and I can move the world. And that's exactly what this last part tells you to find. Everything else will be easier or unnecessary is the ultimate leverage test. It tells you when you found, It tells you when you found the first domino. It says that when you do this one thing, everything else you do to accomplish your goal will now be either doable with less effort or no longer even necessary. Let me read that again. It says that when you do this one thing, everything else you could do to accomplish your goal will now be either doable with less effort or no longer even necessary. Most people struggle to comprehend how many things don't need to be done if they will just start by doing the right thing. Most people struggle to comprehend How many things don't need to be done if they would just start by doing the right thing? So if you ask better questions, you get better answers. Most people start a thing by asking, what can I do? And when you ask that question, you will find a lot of potential things to do. And there's a good chance that you put a lot of those things on your list of things to do. And then you just start churning through them. When you ask a better question, you will get a better answer. Instead of what can I do, if you ask the focusing question, what's the one thing that I can do that by doing it, everything else becomes either easier or unnecessary? When you ask that question, then it requires a different level of thinking, requires a different level of searching, and then requires a different level of decision making. First, it requires you to think. Most people don't like thinking, but thinking is required if you're going to make a good decision. So you have to dig deep and you have to think about, what is the one thing I can do such that if I do it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary. So you're doing the hard work up front so that the next steps are going to be easier or not there at all. In health, this is what people don't understand. Going back to doing what feels good. People do what feels good today, but they pay for their health in the future, and it's a lot harder to deal with when you're paying with it in the future. And I know this because I owned a fitness studio for 10 years, owned and operated it. I was in it every day. And our average member was between the age of 45 and 60. So it was like the prime demographic for people who have done little for their health for most of their lives. And now they're like, oh man, I am jacked up and I need to do something. And now I need to do the work to undo all this nonsense that I've done over time. All this not paying attention to my movement, not paying attention to my weight, not paying attention, all this, everything that has accumulated. Now they're trying to do something about it. And they can. By all means, you can do something at any age that you choose to do it. If you're willing to put in the necessary effort, you can make any change that you want in your fitness. I will go ahead and tell you that. That is a fact. You can make any change that you choose if you're ready and willing to put in the effort. But almost every one of them, when I met them, said, if only I would have started this sooner. Because now I wouldn't have to have having to deal with all this. I don't have to now back up everything that I've done, undo all of this unhealthiness I've built into my body. So they're choosing the easy path now, but having to deal with it later. You still have to deal with it eventually. And it is always harder later than if you just do it now. So when you ask the question, what can I do now? What's the one thing I can do? Then it helps make those later decisions just easier. And maybe you don't have to make as many decisions down the road, but because it's a little more challenging and requires a little more effort today, we put it off to tomorrow. And we all know tomorrow never shows up. We put it off till tomorrow, and then the next day, and then the next day, because it requires just a modicum of effort, just a little bit of thinking, a little bit of doing, a little something different. Instead of just, let me decide to do this, let me get this done, let me think about it so that I don't get into a bunch of unnecessary nonsense down the road. So I don't have to find myself in a situation where I have to just dig myself out of a deep hole because I was lazy today. Okay? And that's what we want. Human beings are biologically built for progress. If you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling a level of dissatisfaction and discontent with your life, it is probably because you're not moving forward in something, somewhere. And if you're doing something, you feel like you're doing something, you're like, hey, I've been doing things to try and make this happen, Now it's time to ask a different question. Not, hey, I've been trying to do things, what can I do? Ask the question and narrow it down. Am I doing things that are fun to do, that are doable to do, or am I doing things that are necessary to do? Change your focus, get a different answer. That's what we're trying to accomplish. Go out and get it done. Make your life different. Make sure to share this with anybody else who needs to refocus as well. And until next time, here's to your 1% growth every day.